The beginning of literature. About 500 years ago, they began to record laws, letters, poems, and taxes. Using reeds as pens, they made wedge-shaped marks on slabs of damp clay. This form of writing is called cuneiform. Historians believe cuneiform was the world's first writing. To write in cuneiform, they made wedge-shaped marks on a damp clay tablet. When the clay dried, the tablet formed a permanent record.
Antiquity. China. Chinese classics and classical Chinese poetry. The classic of poetry is the oldest existing collection of Chinese poetry, comprising 305 works by anonymous authors dating from the 11th to 7th centuries BC. Hebrew literature. The book that constitutes the Hebrew Bible developed over roughly a millennium. The oldest texts seem to come from the 11th or 10th century BCE. They are edited works being a collection of various sources enticingly and carefully woven together. The works have been subject to various literature evaluation, both secular and religious.
Middle Ages Europe. After the fall of Rome, many of the literary approaches and styles invented by the Greeks and Romans fell out of favor in Europe. Focus more and more on faith and faith-related matters. Islamic world. The most well-known fiction from the Islamic world was the Book of 1001 Nights, which was compilation of many earlier folk tales told by the Persian queen Scheherazade. Arabic literature were pioneers of the philosophy. India. Early medieval literature in India sees the flowering of Sanskrit drama, classical Sanskrit poetry, and the compilation of the Puranas. China. Lyric poetry advanced far more in China than in Europe prior 1000, as multiple new forms developed in the Han, Tang, and Song dynasties. Perhaps the greatest poets of his era in Chinese literature were Li Bai and Fudu. Japan. Classical Japanese literature generally refers to literature produced during the Heian period, what some would consider a golden era of art and literature. The Tale of Genji, early 11th century, by Murasaki Shikibu, is considered the preeminent masterpiece of Heian fiction and an early example of a work of fiction in the form of a novel. Renaissance, 16th and 17th centuries. Its name means rebirth, which means flourishing of arts and other culture that swept across Europe. Johann Gutenberg and his invention of printing press, an innovation for Europe at least, that would change literature forever.
Early Modern Period. Novel originated from this period and grown in popularity in the next century. Place for entertainment as opposed to religious enlightenment. William Shakespeare is the most notable of the early modern playwrights, but numerous others made important contributions including Christopher Marlowe, Molière, and Ben Jonson. The new style in English poetry during 7th century was that of the metaphysical movement. The metaphysical poets was John Donne, George Herbert, Andrew Marvell, and others.
Modern literature. People are really into strict science, logic, and intellectual discourse. Augustan literature and French literature of the 18th century. The early 18th century sees the conclusion of the Baroque period in the ancient age of enlightenment with authors such as Immanuel Kant, Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Gotthold Ephraim Lessing. 19th century is dominated by the Victorian era, characterized by the Romanticism with romantic poets such as William Wordsworth, Lord Byron, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and genres such as the Gothic novel. In Denmark, the early 19th century Golden Age produced prolific literary authors such as Steen Kierkegaard and Hans Christian Andersen. In the later 19th century, Romanticism is countered by Realism and Naturalism. The late 19th century, known as Belle Époque, with its fantastical, retrospectively appeared as a golden age of European culture, cut short by the outbreak of World War I in 1914. The main periods of 20th century literature are captured in the bipartite division: modernist literature, postmodern literature. Popular literature develops its own genres such as fantasy and science fiction.